In Lebanon, just before dawn, a faint cry broke the silence of the early morning. The old man had just awakened, but not in an ordinary way. He sat up in bed as if something had pulled him back into his body, placed his hands over his chest, and whispered in fear, "Ya Allah, I saw what happens to those who sleep without asking for forgiveness." The bedroom door opened when the neighbor, hearing the noise, ran to help him. She found him pale, trembling, his eyes wide open as if he were still staring at something that didn't belong to this world. The old man tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He collapsed to the floor, fainting before he could finish the sentence. Another neighbor rushed in, alarmed. What did he see? What happened to him? The old man regained consciousness for a moment, breathing with difficulty, and murmured, "Allah showed the fate of the soul that falls asleep without repentance." And then his eyes closed again. What could have been so terrifying that it brought down a man with such steadfast faith? Stay with me, because what he revealed afterward changed the way the entire neighborhood understood sleep and forgiveness. Before continuing, make sure you are subscribed and comment which city you're watching from. The old man lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Beirut, surrounded by narrow alleys, colorful clotheslines, and old houses holding decades of stories. His life was simple: prayers at the proper time, light meals, occasional visits to the mosque, and long afternoons sitting on the porch watching the movement of the streets. Though age had weakened his body, his heart remained steady, sustained by a quiet and constant faith. Every night before lying down, he followed a ritual he had never abandoned. He placed his hand over his chest, closed his eyes, and recited words of repentance. It wasn't out of fear, but habit, a gesture his late wife used to repeat beside him back when they still shared the same bed. He remembered her voice, "Never fall asleep without cleansing your heart." Sometimes the soul leaves, and it doesn't return the way it left. Those words stayed with him for decades, and so he did, always. But that night, something slipped from the ordinary. Extreme exhaustion, together with the dull pain in his back, made him lie down earlier than usual, promising himself he would recite his plea for forgiveness after adjusting his pillow. He closed his eyes for just a second and fell asleep. No supplication, no repentance, no gesture he had repeated for so many years. While the neighborhood quieted under the cold night, the old man slept deeply, unaware that his forgetfulness would open a spiritual path no one around him would dare to face. And it was in that interval, between sleep and the unseen world, that everything began to change. The morning after the fainting spell, the old man insisted on returning to his routine, despite his obvious frailty. He said he needed to go to the main square to pick up his medicine, since the local pharmacy didn't carry the pills that eased his joint pain. The neighbor tried to convince him to stay home. "Uncle, wait until someone can go with you." He smiled as he adjusted his thin coat. "Daughter, some walks we take while talking to Allah." The atmosphere felt strange that day. Low clouds filled the sky, and a timid drizzle fell over the narrow streets. The city seemed divided between rushed movement and the slow murmur of a grey morning. The old man walked slowly, leaning on his cane, watching the water slide down window ledges. When he reached the central square, he found the usual commotion: vendors calling customers, cars speeding recklessly, and young people talking loudly under the pharmacy awning. The rain, though light, seemed to bother them less than the old man's presence. When he stepped into the line, holding the folded prescription in his pocket, a few heads turned. Two boys laughed to each other. "Look at that. He's going to slow everything down," one said with open sarcasm. "If he takes too long, we'll switch lines," the other replied, laughing louder. The old man heard them but kept his expression calm. His slow steps were simply the result of age, not choice. He took a deep breath and remained still, waiting like anyone else. The line moved little by little. The rain grew stronger, forcing people to huddle beneath the narrow awning. A woman complained, "Why doesn't he wait outside? He's taking up space." The comment stirred sudden irritation among some people. Impatient looks appeared, as if the old man were responsible for the morning's discomfort. The pharmacy employee stepped outside and surveyed the scene with annoyance. "Sir, could you hurry up? We have a lot of people today," he said, clearly irritated. The old man bowed his head humbly. "I'm only waiting my turn, son." The man behind him grumbled, "Waiting too long. If you're that weak, come back when you're better." A heavy silence spread through part of the line. The rain drummed on the awning, its faint echo heightening the tension. The old man gripped his cane more firmly, trying to stay upright amid the subtle shoves and harsh words. Still, he didn't react. He only whispered, barely audible. Allah knows what each heart carries. Meanwhile, the sky seemed to follow the scene, darkening slowly. A gust of wind brought an unexpected chill, as if warning that the morning wouldn't end like any other. And the first sign that something was about to change came precisely when the line moved one more step and the old man nearly fell. When the old man steadied himself and took another step toward the door, the pharmacy employee appeared again, this time even more impatient. The rain intensified, pushing more people under the cramped awning, and a sense of urgency settled over everyone, except for the elder, who stood firm but visibly tired. The employee crossed his arms and spoke loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Sir, you need to speak louder. I can't understand anything you're saying." The old man lifted his gaze slowly, holding the prescription with trembling fingers. "Son, my voice is weak today. I just need these medicines." The man scoffed, running a hand through his wet hair. "If you can't speak properly, come back later. There are plenty of people waiting." The words hit like stones. A woman in line frowned and whispered to her friend, "He didn't need to say that. He's just an old man." Another customer, irritated by the delay, raised his voice. "It's always like this, everything gets held up. Doesn't he know there are other people here?" The old man tried to answer, but no sound came out. He inhaled slowly, attempting to gather strength. "Forgive me, I'm having a difficult day." The employee lifted his hand, cutting him off. "I don't want excuses. Either speak louder or leave the line. This pharmacy isn't a place for whispering." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some agreed, others shook their heads in disapproval. Two teenage girls holding decorated umbrellas exchanged comments. "Poor man, he can barely stand. And that guy treating him like he's a burden." Near the entrance of the square, two municipal guards watched the situation. One nudged the other with his elbow and said, "This is going to turn into a problem. The old man is clearly not well." The other nodded, paying closer attention. The tension was visible and for some reason seemed to grow by the second, as if the entire environment were responding to the disrespect. The old man, realizing he had become the focus of everyone's irritation, tried to say something else, even with his weak voice. "I just need the medicine and Allah's forgiveness." The employee rolled his eyes. "Here he goes with mystical talk. My friend, you're getting in the way." A heavy silence settled over the line. The young man's tone had crossed a boundary that even the most impatient people could feel. The rain weakened and strengthened in short cycles, as if marking the rhythm of the argument. The wind blew harder, pushing small leaves across the ground. Something in the air shifted, not a storm, but expectation. The guards took 2 steps forward, ready to intervene. And at that moment, just as the employee was about to insist on expelling him, a subtle detail changed the direction of the scene. The elderly man placed his hand over his chest, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes for a brief instant. No one imagined what that would mean. The moment the old man closed his eyes created a strange pause in the air. It didn't last long, maybe a second, maybe less, but enough to change the environment around him. The chatter in the line, previously chaotic, softened as if someone had lowered the volume of the world. The first person to notice was a Lebanese woman holding a silver wristwatch. She raised her arm to check the time and frowned. "My watch stopped," she murmured, perplexed. "Right now?" She tapped the glass, turned the crown, but the hands remained frozen. Meanwhile, the employee kept staring at the old man, but something unsettled him. A cold gust of wind passed behind him, chilling the back of his neck. He looked around, confused. "Did you guys feel that?" No one answered, because at that exact moment, a flock of pigeons resting under the awning took flight all at once. Not in a straight line, but circling high above the square. They spun in such a precise pattern it looked choreographed. Children stopped running to look up, pointing with fascination. "Mom, why are they flying like that?" "I don't know." The rain, which had weakened earlier, fell again for a few seconds and stopped unexpectedly once more. The ground was covered with small, shining droplets reflecting the market lights. Then the lamps began to flicker. First one, then another, until the entire row flickered in short intervals. Bright light, dim light, bright light, dim light. The flickering didn't feel random. It followed an almost calculated rhythm, as if synchronized with the pigeons circling above. The crowd stepped back a little, surrounded by rising discomfort. The air grew colder. Not the usual cold from weather changes, but a deep shiver that seemed to pass through clothing and touch the skin directly. People rubbed their arms, as if an unseen presence had drifted through the space. Near the side of the pharmacy, a tourist recording the commotion looked at his phone screen and widened his eyes. "You need to see this." Something passed behind him. The video showed the moment the old man stood still with his hand on his chest. Behind him, between two shadows, a dark shape moved quickly. Not human, not animal. A stretched blur, as if made only of motion, without a defined body. "That's not caused by the rain," the tourist said, nervous. "Look again." People stepped closer, cautiously, leaning in to see the screen. The figure appeared clearly for a single second before disappearing out of frame. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth. "My grandmother used to say that when someone sleeps, the soul leaves and angels escort it. But if the person sleeps in sin..." The rest of the sentence caught in her throat. Everyone looked at the old man again. He remained still, his eyes still closed, breathing deeply, as if he were in another place, between the visible world and something beyond. The wind picked up, lifting scraps of paper off the ground and making the awning creak slightly. The flickering light continued, beating in a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat. The guards, watching intently, took 2 more steps toward the old man. One of them spoke quietly. "This isn't normal. Something is happening to him." The crowd, once impatient, now stood in complete silence. Everyone knew this wasn't just dizziness or coincidence. It was a sign, a warning, a boundary between worlds being crossed in front of them. And no one was prepared for the explanation that would come next. The emotional turmoil that had taken over the square slowly gave way to a concentrated silence, the kind that comes before important revelations. The people, still shaken by the strange signs around them, gathered in small groups trying to understand what they were witnessing. There was unease but also respect, as if everyone sensed that something sacred was unfolding before their eyes. The tourist who had recorded the shadow behind the old man, a tall, fast-talking individual, stopped the footage and began rewinding it frame by frame. He called the people around him, "Look here, it's right at this moment." The images moved forward slowly, and the crowd leaned in with focus. The exact moment when the old man moved his lips, murmuring words only a few could distinguish, coincided with the appearance of a dark silhouette shifting from one side to the other. There was no defined shape. It seemed only an outline, as if made of mist or condensed movement. A young Syrian woman watching over the tourist's shoulder brought her hand to her mouth, taken by a feeling that was hard to describe. That isn't an ordinary shadow. Shadows don't move against the wind. And indeed the wind was blowing in the opposite direction. The figure moved independently of the gusts, as if following its own purpose. A Pakistani man with some knowledge of ancient texts stepped closer and spoke in a low voice. "There are accounts that during sleep the soul travels, and angels are assigned to take it and return it. But when someone sleeps in negligence, when one forgets forgiveness..." He hesitated, as if afraid to finish the sentence. A group of young men beside him insisted, "What happens, uncle? Tell us." The man drew a deep breath. "Some say the return becomes heavy, that there is confrontation, that forces compete for the way back." His words lingered in the air like fog, leaving everyone with chills. It was hard to ignore what they had just seen in the video. The guards, who had only been observing before, decided to step closer. One of them requested firmly, "Show it again, please." The tourist replayed the segment once more. The dark figure moved clearly behind the old man, but never touched him. It only circled, as if it were watching him. A guard, frowning, commented, "That isn't a reflection. There's nothing behind him that could cast a shadow like that." Another suggested, "Maybe someone walked by quickly." But no one had seen any person in that direction, and all angles showed only the elderly man standing still, murmuring something too soft to catch. With each replay of the video, more and more people gathered, forming a dense circle driven by curiosity and, at the same time, fear of the unexplainable. Children tightened their grip on their parents' hands. Elderly people steadied themselves on canes, watching every detail. While the analysis continued, the old man, who remained seated a short distance away, began moving his lips again. His voice was so faint that only those closest to him could hear. A Moroccan woman, leaning beside him, listened clearly. "He's reciting something." She leaned a little closer and recognized it. It was a short passage, repeated with effort, as if the old man were drawing strength from every syllable. "Allahumma inni astaghfiruka," he murmured. "He's asking for forgiveness," she said, moved. "Even weak, he's asking for forgiveness." The sentence echoed through the onlookers, like a sudden reminder of the theme surrounding everything: repentance, negligence, the danger of sleeping without supplication. An Egyptian university student, who had been quiet until then, spoke with a trembling voice. There's a hadith that says souls are held during the night, and some don't return, and the one who sleeps without asking forgiveness may wake up heavy, as if he saw something he wasn't meant to see. The crowd exchanged looks. The pieces were beginning to come together. It wasn't coincidence, it wasn't delusion. The old man, now more lucid, slowly lifted his head. His eyes, wet and reddened, scanned the square as if he could see something the others couldn't. He then whispered another phrase, a short but powerful verse. Fa'inna ma'al usri yusra. Relief comes after difficulty. The square seemed to breathe with him. The wind weakened. The light steadied. But no one moved, because everyone sensed that what they were uncovering was only the beginning, and that the true revelation was about to emerge. The uneasiness that hovered in the air soon turned into persistent murmurs, spreading like silent waves across the square. The investigation of the video had already caused enough astonishment, but what began to surface from witness accounts carried an even heavier weight. Not just strange, but deeply spiritual. A Lebanese vendor who owned a small tea stand near the benches approached the guards with a serious expression. He wiped his hands on his apron and pointed to the old man sitting a few meters away. "I saw him this morning," he said quietly. "He was leaning against the wall of my shop. He looked disoriented. When I asked if he was okay, he said something I didn't understand at the time." The guard asked him to continue. The man drew a long breath. He said, "My soul was taken and it almost didn't return. I thought it was a metaphor. Now, I'm not so sure." That sentence, spoken with such calm and yet so much fear, made several people step back. It was as if the very air had absorbed the statement and returned it heavier. A young woman who had been near the old man at the beginning of the commotion pressed a hand to her chest, shocked. "He said that before the line too," she said. "I thought it was just exhaustion." Little by little, people began approaching the old man, not to confront him but to understand. A sensitive young man, a student of religion, watched the elder with a mix of fascination and fear. He opened a worn-out book he carried in his backpack and flipped through it quickly until he found the page he was looking for. "Listen," he said, showing the text. "Here it says that Allah collects the souls during sleep, and some He keeps, and those who sleep negligent may awaken carrying signs of what they faced." Silence spread. Around them, adults, youth, and elders seemed to absorb every syllable with complete attention. The light rain that had begun early that morning had now stopped entirely, without any meteorological explanation. No wind, no sound, just a still atmosphere, as if the world itself were watching with them. The woman who had filmed the shadow, feeling her heart pound, added, "You all saw that thing behind him. It didn't move with the wind. It seemed to walk on its own." An Egyptian man leaned on his cane, inhaling deeply. "This matches what my grandfather used to say," he murmured. "When someone sleeps without repentance, forces compete for their return. Sometimes the soul comes back frightened. Other times it comes back marked." At that moment, a woman wearing a pink scarf known in the neighborhood for helping orphans stepped forward with a revelation that struck the center of the square like a stone. "I know this man," she said, pointing to the old man. "He and his wife used to ask for forgiveness together before sleeping, every day, for more than 40 years. The crowd turned their eyes to her, intrigued. "After she passed away," he continued, she said, her voice wavering. "He never slept without supplication. He would say, 'If Allah takes my soul tonight, may it go clean.'" People exchanged glances. So why, on that one night, did he forget? It was the thought that crossed everyone's mind at the same time. The coincidence seemed impossible. A young Syrian man, moved, summarized it. 40 years without failing. One single night of forgetfulness. And today, all of this happens? The question lingered, echoing from mind to mind. As if wanting to answer without words, the old man lifted his head. His eyes, still tired, reflected a mix of fear and understanding. He took a deep breath, his trembling hand resting on his knee, and revealed, "Last night, I was tired, so tired. I just lay down. I told myself I would make the supplication after adjusting the pillow, but sleep overtook me." People held their breath. He continued, his voice breaking, "And when I woke up, I felt I wasn't alone in the room. Something was watching me, and something was pulling me." A shiver ran through the entire square. It was as if every witness finally assembled the pieces. The shadow in the video, the sudden silence, the drop in temperature, the circling pigeons, the stopped watch, the old man saying, "My soul was taken." Everything converged into one point. He had truly awakened between two worlds. And when he opened his eyes that morning, he saw more than he should have seen, and more than many could endure. The revelation had been made. But what would come next still left everyone suspended. Something had yet to manifest, and no one dared predict the magnitude of the next step. The revelation about the forgotten supplication fell over the square like a silent storm. The people, now divided between astonishment, empathy, and fear, began encircling the old man with a mix of urgency and reverence. There were no more jokes, no irritation, no impatience about the line. Only the sense that something unseen hovered over that moment, something greater than anyone there could grasp. A young Syrian man, desperate for answers, approached first. "Please, tell us what you saw when you woke up. What was in your room?" The elder didn't respond. He only lowered his head, as if the memory were too heavy to touch. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes showed the same silent haze of someone still struggling to separate dream from reality. The guards, noticing the gathering crowd and fearing the situation might spiral, decided to guide him to a more secluded area, beneath a large tree that shaded an old bench. They didn't pull or force him. They simply opened a path so he could sit with dignity, away from the immediate commotion. Even there, in the corner of the square, the crowd drew near, keeping their distance but watching every movement. It was as if everyone feared missing a single word that could change their understanding of the spiritual world. A Lebanese woman, the same who had recognized him earlier, gently held his hand. "You don't need to be afraid. We're here." But the old man took a deep breath, pressed his chest with his right hand, and murmured a phrase that made many people hold their breath. "Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil." Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best protector. The recitation came out trembling, yet steady enough to show he was seeking strength from within, as if fighting an inner battle between sharing what he saw and protecting others from the weight of that vision. A vendor leaned closer, trying to draw out details. "Brother, if something tried to take your soul, we need to know. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's a punishment. Tell us what appeared before you." On the other side, a young woman raised her hands, asking for calm. "You're pressuring him too much. He just went through something difficult. Let him breathe." This verbal clash increased the tension. On one side, those longing for the full story, believing every detail carried a powerful spiritual secret. On the other, those fearing that forcing the truth could harm him even more, or worse, invite something that should not be summoned. The elder closed his eyes, leaning his head back, inhaling the cold air that blew through the square. Something in his expression told them he was reliving that dawn, frame by frame. People sensed it and fell silent around him, as if they feared interrupting the process. He then opened his eyes slowly and spoke with a low voice, almost like a whisper lost in the wind. "When I woke up, it wasn't my room I saw first. It was as if I was somewhere else. A dark space, with no floors, no ceiling, and only a void calling to me." The crowd leaned in, absorbing every word. He continued, hesitating. "Something was near. It didn't touch me, but it watched me. I felt that I wasn't allowed to sleep that way, not like that." His hands trembled harder. Everyone's heartbeat quickened, but then he stopped, as if he had reached the limit of what he could say, without opening doors that shouldn't be opened. A young man insisted, "What was it? Did you see a face, a shape?" "Enough," the Lebanese woman cut in firmly. "He has said all he needs to." The guards agreed with a discreet nod. The old man wiped away a tear that had begun to fall without him noticing. "Some visions are personal burdens. I shouldn't describe them. What I saw was meant for me, to remind me of what I forgot." The square fell completely silent. He lowered his head once more and repeated, now with greater conviction as if reaffirming his decision, "Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil." The crowd understood. He had chosen silence, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. And that choice was preparing the ground for something even deeper, something no one expected to witness. The silence that settled over the square after the old man recited "Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil" again had an almost physical weight. People remained still, as if any sudden movement could tear the fragile layer of spirituality covering the atmosphere. Everyone waited. They didn't know for what, but they knew something was about to happen. The elder was still seated beneath the tree, breathing with difficulty, his hand resting on his chest. A few steps behind him, the employee who had humiliated him earlier watched from a distance, uneasy. The arrogant expression had vanished, replaced by an undefined discomfort, as if he sensed an outcome he could no longer control. It was then that the air changed. First, A faint draft passed through the square, so subtle that many didn't notice. But seconds later, a stronger current took shape. Not an ordinary breeze, but a gust that seemed to have its own direction. It swept down the narrow streets, curved around the stalls, slipped between people, and converged exactly where the old man sat. The dust on the ground began to rise, not in scattered clouds, but in a perfect circle spinning around the elder as if dancing. The tree above him swayed, even though the surrounding leaves did not move, creating a contrast that made several people step back. A child grabbed her mother's hand. "Mom, why is the wind only there?" The woman gave no answer. No one had one. The sound around them grew muffled, as if the entire square had been wrapped in an invisible frame. The circling dust gained speed, spinning with strange precision, never losing control, as though obeying silent commands. And then, it happened. Among the swirling grains, something crossed the space. A subtle flash, like a thread of liquid light weaving through the crowd for less than a second. Many didn't see it, but those who did were frozen. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't a lamp. It moved with intention. A young man gasped, almost breathless. I saw it. It passed right here, right in front of me." The wind grew stronger, lifting the dust circles slightly, revealing the old man's face partially lit by the light escaping between the suspended particles. His eyes were closed, as if listening to something only he could hear. At that exact moment, the employee who had mistreated him stepped backward. His legs trembled. He tried to steady himself, but stumbled over his own foot, nearly falling as he grabbed a support column. People stared at him in surprise, not because of the stumble, but because of the expression on his face. Absolute terror. He stared at the space above the old man, as if seeing something frightening. There's something there," he whispered, pale. Several others stepped back, feeling a shiver climb their spines. The flash passed again, slow, almost imperceptible, and vanished. Suddenly, the wind stopped. The dust fell to the ground like dry rain, and the square plunged into a silence that felt alive. No one dared speak. Everyone felt they had just witnessed a sign. They didn't know its meaning, but they knew it wasn't mere coincidence. The elder opened his eyes slowly, as if returning from a distant place. He looked around, saw the shaken people, the tense guards, the trembling employee, and the whole square held its breath, because everyone wanted to know what would happen now. When the wind stopped and the dust settled on the ground, as if drained of strength, the square felt like a different place. The earlier tension vanished, replaced by a reverent, almost solemn quiet. That invisible impact had shattered resistance, dissolved arrogance, and made everyone rethink what they had witnessed. The first to move was the very employee who had humiliated the old man. He still held onto the column as if his legs could no longer support his own weight. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide open. After a few shaky breaths, he approached slowly, taking hesitant steps, head lowered. He stopped in front of the elder, unable to meet his gaze. I was wrong," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "I was too harsh, unfair. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." The old man lifted his eyes, still tired but serene. There was no anger, only the calm of someone who understands the value of forgiveness. Before he could respond, the employee took another small step and placed a hand over his own chest. "Please, forgive me." Those words carried the weight of years, not just a moment. The people around them exhaled deeply, as if witnessing something that transcended any ordinary conflict. The guards, who had been observing everything cautiously, completely shifted their posture. They moved closer to the old man with care, creating space around him and ensuring no one disturbed him. One of them spoke softly. "Sir, do you need water? Would you like to sit more comfortably? We can call someone from your family." The contrast was clear. Minutes earlier, many saw him as an inconvenience. Now he was someone who carried something sacred. The young men who had laughed earlier that morning, even before knowing his name, now stood motionless. Some held their hands together. Others kept their heads down. One of them, visibly shaken, approached timidly. "I'm sorry for laughing earlier. I didn't understand your state." The old man simply nodded lightly, as if compassion rose naturally from his heart. The square, once loud with conversations, lines, vendors, and hurried footsteps, now resembled a quiet classroom where everyone waited to learn a lesson never written in any book. People approached carefully, forming a semicircle around him, not to pressure him but to listen. A Moroccan woman spoke with a trembling voice. "Whatever you wish to say, we will hear with respect." A man with a graying beard added, "Something was shown to us. Maybe it's meant for us too." This collective movement of humility altered the atmosphere almost tangibly. It was as if the wind that had appeared minutes earlier had carried away not only dust, but ignorance, pride, and indifference. Some people began making dua. Others recited familiar verses under their breath. Children approached curiously, but without causing disorder. Even the merchants closed their cash registers to watch the old man, as if he were a mirror in which everyone was about to see themselves. The elderly man took a deep breath, sensing the change around him. For the first time since sunrise, the entire square was united, not by fear, but by remorse and a desire for understanding. And everyone knew that his next words could guide the outcome of an experience none of them would ever forget. The transformation did not happen with shouts or long speeches. It began almost imperceptibly in the small choices made by each person who had witnessed what occurred in the square. Later that afternoon, as the sun sank behind the old buildings, many residents walked home in silence, repeating in their minds the words they had heard from the elder and recalling the unexplainable wind that had circled only around him. There was a spiritual weight in the air, not of fear but of awakened awareness. The old man himself, now more stable, was escorted back to his street by two young men and a woman who insisted on helping him carry his medicine. They spoke little, as if each step were part of a newly discovered ritual. One of the young men, still impressed, commented, "I never thought asking for forgiveness at night was so important." The woman agreed with a slight nod. "My mother used to do that, but I never understood why. Now I understand." The news spread through the neighborhood like water on dry soil. Those who had not been in the square heard different versions of the event. Some exaggerated, others whispered, but all filled with reverence. The only point everyone agreed on was the same. This elderly man, once overlooked by his neighbors, was now seen as someone who carried a lesson the entire city needed to hear. That night, before the lights on the balconies went out, something unusual happened. Several families gathered in their living rooms, turned off the television, and recited short prayers before going to bed. Children asked their parents how the act of seeking forgiveness worked, and elders were invited to explain what they knew, receiving attention they had not been given in years. The market, which usually stayed loud until late, adopted new habits. Shop owners, as they closed their doors, lowered their voices and avoided arguments. It was as if the end of the day had gained a new purpose, a call to stillness, not to chaos. A shopkeeper, who had seen the old man endure humiliation earlier, approached him the next morning with a small bag of dates. "For you," he said shyly, "and thank you for what you taught us yesterday, even without meaning to." The elder smiled gently, as if unaware of the impact he had caused. The change spread through homes. Elderly people were treated with more care. Neighbors offered help spontaneously. Young men who once mocked his slowness now walked slowly beside him, attentive to every detail. Some elderly women said, moved, that their grandchildren were now reminding them to recite the nightly supplications. Men going through hardships began repeating prayers of forgiveness before sleeping, remembering the story of the one who almost did not return. The city, once indifferent to the old man's silent ritual, began to live a new normal. Quieter nights, deeper prayers, more attentive hearts. And all of this because a single forgotten moment became a warning, not just for one man, but for everyone around him. The sunset painted the sky of Beirut in golden tones when the old man stepped onto his balcony, leaning against the railing worn by time. He observed the horizon with a serene yet profoundly aware gaze. The gentle afternoon breeze brushed his face, as if reminding him delicately of everything that had happened, not only the fright that shook his body, but the silent call that awakened his soul, the square, the swirling wind, the shadows, the turbulent awakening. Everything now carried a different meaning, and it was impossible not to reflect on the mystery that surrounds sleep, this moment when the soul partially leaves the body, as so many ancient traditions describe, a moment of absolute vulnerability, in which repentance and forgetfulness weigh more than any action taken during the day. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, releasing a deep sigh. He knew the experience would serve as a reminder, not only for himself, but for all who had witnessed that morning. The truth was simple and yet terrifying. No one has any guarantee that the soul returns the same way it leaves. And for that reason, cleansing the heart before surrendering to sleep can change invisible destinies. He lifted his gaze to the orange-tinted sky and murmured something brief, almost imperceptible, a supplication that encompassed everything he had learned. May Allah purify what I carry before the night takes me again. The city, now quieter, seemed to follow that prayer, and so ended a story that began with forgetfulness and concluded with spiritual awakening. If this reflection touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video, allowing each new story to deepen your understanding of the signs many ignore, yet have always been right before us.